Hello, I'm JJ Joaquin. Welcome to Philosophy and What Matters, where we discuss things that matter from a philosophical point of view. In today's episode, we will focus on the philosophy of mind. We all have minds. We can think, feel, be conscious, and have beliefs and desires. But what exactly does it mean to have a mind? Does having a mind mean having a brain? Or is it something else? Here to discuss these questions with us is Tim Crane, professor of philosophy at the Central European University and a world leading philosopher of mind. Hello, Professor Crane. Welcome to Philosophy and What Matters.
Hello, JJ. Nice to meet you.
Okay, before getting into our topic, let's first discuss your philosophical background. How did you get into philosophy?
Well, I think, like many people, I got into philosophy through religion, religious questions. I was brought up a Roman Catholic, and my religion was quite important in my family. And I started reflecting on the meaning of these questions and how we know whether there is a God or whether there's life after death. And I started reading about things like this when I was a teenager, and that's what led me towards philosophy. In the end, I dropped the religion, but kept up with the philosophy.
So, who influenced you to pursue a career in academic philosophy?
Well, I think my most inspiring teacher when I was an undergraduate was E.J. Lowe, Jonathan Lowe,
Mhm.
who was a wonderful lecturer and seemed to have this absolute mastery of the subject that he could discuss things from all over all areas of philosophy he had opinions on, and so he was a very inspiring teacher, and he was very encouraging to me. Sadly, he died much younger. He died in his 60s um, some years ago, but he was a big influence on me. I I then went and I studied in Cambridge for my PhD. My advisors there were Jeremy Butterfield and Hugh Mellor.
Mhm.
Uh, they also were they were tough, both very, very tough teachers, but inspiring too. So I think they kind of inspired me. I think what I got from Jonathan Lowe and also from Hugh Mellor was this, the importance of pursuing your own questions and not following someone else's agenda, and how important that is for philosophy.
So you're talking about Jonathan Liu, who's famous for the Possibility of Metaphysics book, the Sketch of
Yeah,
Metaphysics, and of course Hugh Miller, who's into a lot of things, especially probability theory and metaphysics as well. So what
yes.
led you to specialize in the philosophy of mind if these influences are into metaphysics?
Yes, I think you see, I was interested in this question of the soul and whether we have a soul and what that means. And because I was taught when I was growing up that each of us has an immortal soul. And the more I thought about that, the more strange it seemed, and I wanted to understand what people meant by that. Um, so I then was very interested in philosophy of mind as an undergraduate, and then as a graduate student, I came across this book edited by Andrew Woodfield, and it was called Thought and Object. And it
Mhm.
was a collection of essays from some conference or workshop or something, and it had a famous essay by Dan Dennett in there called Beyond Belief, and various other classic essays. And this book was described itself as being about the content of thought, and I thought, and I had no idea what that meant, the content of thought. And I thought, but it seemed something incredibly exciting, the content of thought, right? Well, thoughts have content, what does that mean? And so I got distracted onto that whole question of the content of thought, and that's what I wrote my PhD on, actually.
Okay,
Mm.
so we're starting to do philosophy of mind. Now, on to our topic. Most of your work focuses on different issues in this area in philosophy. But could you define the field for us in the first place?
Yeah, I think the philosophy of mind um, is the most general investigation into the nature of the mind, or into the nature of minds, or creatures with minds. So the most general in the sense that we don't presuppose, I mean, as you mentioned at the beginning, we all know, each of us knows that we have a brain, we know that we have a mind, but we don't presuppose that what's essential to having a mind is having a brain. So, for example, we can ask questions about whether robots might have minds or artificially created intelligences might have minds, and those questions aren't answered by saying that these beings don't have brains. So, although the brain is obviously the mechanism of our mind, I say obviously, some people might disagree, but the brain is the mechanism of our mind. The philosophical question about the nature of the mind is not the same question about as the nature of the brain. So it's about what is, so to speak, what counts as having a mind, what is the essence or nature of anything that we count as having a mind.
How is it different from cognitive psychology, though? Because cognitive psychologists, neuroscientists are also concerned about the cognitive or the consciousness and all those other things related to the mind. So, how is philosophy of mind different from those other fields?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, I think cognitive psychology only deals with actual minds, the nature of how minds actually are. So animal minds and human minds, the mechanisms of our mental processes. Whereas philosophy of mind asks a more general question, which is what must any possible mind be like? Not just the actual minds, but what is, so to speak, the very concept of mind, to use the title of Gilbert Ryle's famous book, the concept of mind. And in order to investigate mental phenomena empirically, you have to be able to clarify what it is that you're trying to investigate. Um, Now, I'm not saying that cognitive psychologists should start their inquiries with a course in the philosophy of mind. I don't think it really works like that. But cognitive psychology is a discipline that's already up and running, and
Mhm.
it comes with certain preconceptions about what it is that it's studying. So, broadly speaking, cognitive psychology doesn't study the circulation of the blood or digestion of food, right? It studies processes that are cognitive. Well, what makes a process cognitive? Um, and then you're off. Then you have to
Mhm.
say. Then you have to say what makes a process cognitive or not. Um, and how does something like the idea of a cognitive process relate to the idea of consciousness, for example? Are some cognitive processes conscious and some not conscious? And so you have to then clarify what you mean by consciousness, and there's a lot of dispute about this in psychology itself and in cognitive science. And some of that dispute is actually philosophical. Um, so it doesn't matter whether they call it philosophical or not. They might call it theoretical, but there are these questions about what is the nature of their subject matter. Um,
Yeah, so
for
there's a recent issue in um, philosophy of science, or particularly in this whole consciousness field. And some say that philosophical questions are not really scientific questions. So, what what could philosophers contribute in this burgeoning field of the study of the mind?
it's hard to answer that in the abstract unless you have a very clear um, or rigid distinction between what's a philosophical question and what's a scientific question.
Mhm.
Uh, I think these things blend into each other. But let me give you an example from the history of psychology. I mean, in the early 20th century, the beginnings of the 20th century, psychology was a field based on introspection, reports of introspection. So subjects were asked to how how certain experiences felt and asked to report how they were, and then the psychologists tried to classify these experiences or mental events or something on the basis of this. And this was felt to be, by some psychologists and philosophers, felt to be insufficiently rigorous or scientific. So there was this move in psychology to say that all you could really study were publicly observable events like
Mhm.
behavior. Right? And that was called behaviorism, and that was spread across the world, from the United States and Britain, and also um, in Europe and in Russia. There were behaviorist psychologists. So that move away from introspection to behavior was based on certain assumptions about what the subject matter of psychology is and how
Mm-hmm.
you can study it. Uh, then behaviorism, for various interesting reasons, was then replaced by what's now known as cognitivism from moving on from the late 1950s to the 60s, where the ambition was then, no, we're not just studying behavior, we're also studying the processes that underlie behavior. We're looking at what's going on inside the mind or the brain, not just the external manifestations of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those disputes about what it is that you're studying are, I think, philosophical. They may say they're theoretical, but they're philosophical disputes. Why can't why can you only study things that are publicly observable? Why is that? Why is that a criterion? Why can't you use those things as evidence for internal mechanisms and study the internal mechanisms? Um, so these questions, I think, are philosophical, and a lot of the attacks on behaviorism were philosophical attacks,
Mm-hmm.
attacks by Chomsky and by Geach and Chisholm and others. Um, so I don't have a general answer to the question of what the philosophy gives what philosophy gives to the study of the mind, except that when you start looking at the details, you get a sense for it, you get a nose for it. Well, what are these? What are the big methodological questions? So at the moment, consciousness
Mm-hmm.
is um, is the subject matter, and you can see that there's a huge philosophical element here because no one really knows how to go. There's no agreement. There's no consensus on how to answer the question. You have these big, supposedly empirical theories of consciousness, like the integrated information theory, and you also have global workspace theory. These big claims about consciousness, um, and they all involve some heavy-duty philosophical assumptions about what it is that you're trying to identify.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I'm, I think the boundaries, philosophy, psychology, and cognitive science are wrapped up with philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
I think what independent philosophers can do is that they can come at this without um, a particular empirical horse in the race, so to speak, and just look at the claims that are being made and see, that we're not applying for any research grants to study integrated information. We can just look at the claims that are being made and ask what they mean,
Mm-hmm.
whether they hang together, whether there are problems about the implementation of this. So, for example, the work of Ned Block is a very good example here. When Ned Block has talked about how different concepts of consciousness are used by psychologists and cognitive scientists and neuroscientists.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to me Block's work, although I disagree with a lot of what Block says, but I think Block's work is a good example of how philosophy engages with neuroscience and psychology.
Okay, so you have outlined a brief history of the subject, but what are the key issues discussed in the philosophy of mind in this area of philosophy? So you talked about consciousness. How about intentionality? Is that also a leading issue right now in the philosophy of mind?
Well, I think so. Yeah, intentionality in this sense is a philosophical technical term
Mm-hmm.
for representation, mental representation. So um, it comes actually from the work of an Austrian philosopher, Franz Brentano, in the 1870s. He wrote a book
Mm-hmm.
called Psychology from an Empirical Standpoint, where he tried to define what psychology was in terms of its subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that the subject matter of psychology was mental phenomena, he called them. And mental phenomena were distinguished from other phenomena by the fact that they exhibited this intentionality, intentionality here means that they are mental phenomena, mental acts and states are directed on something other than themselves. So when you have a belief, your belief must always be about something else.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if you have a thought, you're always thinking about something. If you have a desire, it's a desire for something. If you imagine something. And Brentano claimed that this was the defining mark of the mental.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that all mental phenomena exhibit this representation or intentionality. Now that idea is, I think, intentionality and consciousness are generally reckoned to be the two main problem areas of philosophy of mind. And they also have, obviously, they have very close connections to work going on in cognitive psychology. A lot of cognitive psychologists assume the idea of representation, most of them, I would say. Some want to reject the idea of representation, and that's where you see another theoretical or philosophical issue coming in, in the foundations of psychology. Some philosophers think that consciousness is actually the only real mark of the mental, and not an intentionality is only a mark of the mental insofar as it's insofar as thought and other intentional phenomena are conscious. Others think that there's unconscious intentionality, and that thought that beliefs and desires and drives and intentions can also be unconscious. So that requires that you have some understanding of the distinction between the conscious and the unconscious.
But what exactly is your view here? Because you're a
My,
leading expert in philosophy of mind, and one of your key ideas is that the unique feature of the mind, as you have said, following Brentano, is that it's intentional. Is this still your view regarding this debate?
that is my view. Yeah, I've defended that view for some decades now. So I defend that much of Brentano's view. I don't defend other views of his, but for example, Brentano thought that all mental phenomena are conscious. He didn't think there was any unconscious mentality. So I think there is an unconscious mentality. And I think all mental phenomena are connected in some way to their intentionality. I think it's a complex connection, but it's the intentionality is the heart of the mental. That's one of my views. One of my views is that this is not that this that although we are embodied creatures, which is not controversial, right? This doesn't require that we take a stand on the question of materialism or physicalism, which is a view about whether everything in the world is physical or material. Where physical or material in this sense means the subject matter of physics, so physics being the basic science, and everything else is dependent or derivative of on the subject matter of that science. So I'm skeptical about that doctrine of physicalism, and I think that in order to accept the idea that intentionality is the mark of the mental, that all mental phenomena are intentional, and that this intentionality is embodied in our bodies and brains, we don't have to accept physicalism. That's another one of my views. So I'm an anti-physicalist in a sense, but that doesn't mean I think we have immortal souls. So I'm trying to tread this middle path between physicalism that says everything is just purely physical, and the dualism of Descartes or others, that says that we have a soul as well as a body.
Okay, in your opinion, where is philosophy of mind heading? What is its future? Given all the technological advancements that we have, you have generative AI, you have a lot of large language models, and of course, the biology of it, the physiology of the mind as well, has been extensively discussed nowadays. So, where is philosophy of mind heading, given all these advancements in the sciences?
Well, I'd like to say it was heading in my direction. I'm not sure if it is, but I think we lack an overview
Mm,
of all these phenomena. And you can see that we lack an overview because in the case of generative AI, um, there's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of big claims that are made. And there's a lot of people talking about their intuitions or their feelings, about whether a large language model is conscious or something like this, or whether AI could become more intelligent than us or something. These sort of questions, there's a lot of bold claims going on and very little consensus. So AI is a very good example, I think, where we're at the limits of what what we're understanding about the mind. So we have to start theorizing. So this is where I think philosophy of mind properly, if it's properly addressed and if people try and communicate well, could have a role in trying to explain to people what's going on here. If I could give an example, I mean, take this example of large language model. So people say that these large language models will become even more powerful and they will become even more intelligent, and we will arrive at a point where they're more intelligent than us. And that point, which Ray Kurzweil calls the singularity. The singularity is the moment when machines become more intelligent than us. Now, why believe that this is going to happen? Or why believe that this even could happen? To believe this is going to happen, you have to understand what it means to say that something is more intelligent than something else. Now, we already have machines that are more intelligent than us in certain ways. Any chess-playing program can play chess better than me. So that they've already won in that, or Go, or in answering questions very quickly on any subject matter. A large language model can do that better than me and create grammatical sentences quicker than I can on any subject matter without having to look it up. Why think that generalizes to intelligence as such? Well, in order to answer that question, you have to say what you mean by intelligence as such. And people in AI, they realize this, and they've developed this concept of artificial general intelligence. Artificial general intelligence is the kind of an artificial version of the kind of intelligence that we have, not just specific problem-solving capacities like the capacity to win at chess or the capacity to produce grammatical sentences very quickly. Not just these specific tasks, but any task that we think requires intelligence. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be a computationally tractable project, in the sense that you have to, if you think of what a large language model does, it produces text whose content is relevant to the content of the prompt that you put in. So what the fact that it can do this so quickly, so successfully, and so grammatically is quite remarkable. But that's the task. We can specify the task. So if we want to implement artificial general intelligence in an AI machine, then we have to give it the task. What is the task? What is the task of general intelligence? What is a goal? What is the goal of general intelligence? What's it trying to achieve? If we can't answer that question, then we can't ever train a machine to say when it has or has not achieved it.
Mm-hmm.
Can't train the machine, then there's no such thing as this machine learning anything. Now, my view, which this is kind of controversial, but I think it's worth pushing, is that actually there isn't such a thing as general intelligence. There are things we call common sense. Use your common sense. You've got general intelligence, but there are so many mental capacities and abilities and skills that we have that fall under this notion of intelligence that there's no way that you would ever be able to specify what the task of general intelligence is. And if there's no way to specify that, then there's no way to make a computer do it. Because these computers are still, people seem to think that these large language models have a kind of life of their own, but in fact they're computers with algorithms. They're processing information. They're just doing it in a different way than other computers do. So I think here's an example of where if people thought clearly about what the task actually was, then they would step back from making these ambitious claims, unless of course they make claims for other purposes. I mean, I think Elon Musk makes claims about AI and AGI, not he thinks that they're true, but because he wants to wind people up or cause a storm or present another aspect of his worldview. But if you want to really understand what's going on, then you just have to think more carefully about it all. So I think philosophy of mind could play an important role there. I think it's Um, I would also like to understand, which I think is something we don't understand, which is embodiment,
Mm,
and what it means for a mind to be embodied. Um, Descartes, of course, said that Descartes was a dualist. I mean, he thought we had souls as well as bodies, but he also said that I am not lodged in my body like a pilot in a ship,
mm,
meaning it's not that there's my soul is here controlling my body like an ocean liner. It's not like that. I feel myself to be everywhere connected with my body, in where I feel my body to be is where I feel I am. Um,
mm.
and I think these ideas are not well understood in philosophy or psychology. So I would like to pursue that way of understanding things.
Great. So you've been doing philosophy for a while now. And so what's your advice for those who want to get into professional philosophy?
Um, yeah, this it's tough. I mean, first thing you have to really decide whether you're really committed to doing this because you'll be spending a lot of time with not very much money, um, struggling with something that's very difficult. Um, I mean, well, all academic pursuits are difficult in a way. Philosophy has a particular kind of difficulty. You can feel very alone and confused, and it can make you feel very stupid when
Mm,
you try and read some of these books and you try and understand what they're saying. You really can feel that you have to struggle, and it's hard to understand this stuff. So you have to have staying power if you want to stay in this. You have to want to be in it for the long game.
mm,
Um, on the one hand, but on the other hand, you have to be willing to take a risk because it may be that, particularly with the way that universities are going now and the way the world economy is going, it may well be that there'll be fewer jobs in philosophy than there have been. So it's actually hard to get a job teaching philosophy. Those of us who are lucky enough to have a job teaching philosophy should not think that we necessarily got it through our own merits because there was a lot of luck involved,
mm,
being in the right place at the right time, being in. I was fortunate to come on the scene with my PhD just when in Britain they were expanding the universities, so there were more positions in philosophy departments.
mm,
Anyway, so there's a large element of risk, and you have to be realistic about that, and you have to be prepared to struggle. And struggling means being bored a lot of the time, because a lot of these philosophers don't write in a way that's very interesting.
mm,
But when you struggle through it, you can get to something interesting. Um, but if you get that far and you're in a PhD program, and if you're in a PhD program that is likely to lead to some sort of employment, then you have to find your own voice, and this is the difficult thing.
mm,
It's another difficult step. Right? You've got your PhD, then you have to find your own voice. You have to make your own contribution.
mm,
Um, Now, the way contributions work at the moment in academic philosophy is that you have to publish an article in a peer-reviewed journal, where you go through pretty extreme criticism from the reviewers,
mm,
uh, and the tendency is to publish articles that make points within an established conversation. So people are already saying things, and you make a move in that conversation. You say, "Oh, they've missed this point," or "So and so makes an error here, and I can correct this error by saying this." So often these points seem quite small.
mm,
That's the style of analytic philosophy, anyway. I'm talking about. I mean, other forms of philosophy, it's work in a different way. But the style of analytic philosophy is to work in this piecemeal, as you know,
mm,
piecemeal, small point, publish in a peer-reviewed journal. And if you have a few articles in good peer-reviewed journals, then this will be the best way to get onto the next stage of the job ladder.
mm,
So my advice there would be to don't waste your ideas in publishing in places that that where, which won't be visible in the job market. So
mm,
if you think you've got a good idea, try and publish it in one of the good journals, the peer-reviewed journal. Don't publish in a conference proceeding or a collection of essays, something, because it won't have the same impact on the people who are reading your CV.
mm,
So that's piece of sort of professional advice for that. And then once you've got that, then maybe you'll get a postdoc, or if in Europe there are a lot of postdocs, or maybe you'll get a tenure track job in the United States if the United States is still continues to exist and the
Mm-hmm.
universities continue to exist, then you'll get a tenure track job. Um, and then I think you have to start developing your own voice. That's, don't and I would recommend people to think for themselves and don't the the danger in philosophy. One of the dangers is there are well actually there are two related dangers. One is a sort of hero worship, where you follow the ideas of certain very powerful or strong thinkers, and you follow them just because they are those ideas, and so you don't challenge those ideas. Um, so that leads to a certain kind of orthodoxy. And the second danger then is that the orthodoxy can manifest itself in what Thomas Kuhn called normal science,
Mm-hmm.
where normal science is just working through little problems which are set by the established paradigm of the age. Um, and although in some ways that's how analytic philosophy works, we need to be aware that there may be more to it than that, that it's also possible to challenge the paradigms. Um, so that's the second danger. The first danger is hero worship. The second danger is just just doing boring normal science.
But would you say that the career in philosophy is worth it? Is your career worth it?
Uh, I feel very fortunate. I mean, I've had a very enjoyable career. I was very lucky to teach in very good universities in UCL and Cambridge and here in the CEU in Vienna and in Budapest. So for me, yes, I think if you want to, if you can take the risks, and you don't mind the uncertainty for some years, or at least you can live with it, the uncertainty, then this is a very pleasant way to spend your time. Um, um, I think it's very important that there are things like the universities and philosophy departments in civilized countries, and with those of us who can teach in them are very fortunate. Um, I'm not saying there aren't problems with universities or with philosophy, but I think it's a good way to live your life. And there are so many nice things about it. I mean, you do meet lots of interesting people. Students, I mean, this is true in any academic or teaching profession.
Mm.
Students are always young, right? They're always coming in. So you're always hanging around with younger people. And you get older, but the students stay the same age. And that's very stimulating.
Thanks again for your time, for sharing your time, Professor Crane. For you guys out there, join me again for another episode of Philosophy and What Matters, where we discuss things that matter from a philosophical point of view.